Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Lynn Goodman, and I am co-chair of the Greenberg Human Rights Advisory Committee, along with the Reverend Lane Cobb. Our committee, I expect we're going to get a few more people in our meeting. The primary focus of our committee is to educate the community, both the unincorporated parts of Greenberg and the river towns, on human rights issues that are of concern to the people that live in our community. So we do a number of events every year. We always have something for Black History Month, and this is our event. We have a pride rally. We have we respond to complaints and issues that people bring to us in the community, and we are always looking for members. It's a very important time right now to become active in the human rights arena. We definitely need more voices. It's a fantastic opportunity for you to create your own events and spearhead and lead on issues that are interesting and of concern to you who live in our area. We are so privileged for our Black History Month event tonight to welcome Roger Glass, who's a local historian who's become known as the keeper of Black history in Tarrytown. He has done lectures on granular local Black history to many groups all along the Eastern Seaboard, including the Tarrytown Historical Society. As we will learn from him in more detail, his family kept a scrapbook filled with the important news of the day in the 1900s, the important contributions of the Black residents of Tarrytown, so that we can learn from a first-person point of view of what really happened. And his own family was very important in voting rights, women's rights, and social action during the 1900s. It's also a call for all of us to start a scrapbook and know the importance of recording our own history, because someday in the future somebody might find our scrapbook and they will know for sure what happened during our lifetimes. So I'm going to pass this on to Lane, who has some more information on Roger Glass's biography. Lane?
So just before I read Roger's bio and then pass it off to him, I just as a point of housekeeping, just want to remind everyone, if you are not actually speaking, please do mute yourself. And if you have questions during Roger's presentation, would you just put them in the chat and he's been willing to pause and answer any questions you have. Following his presentation, there will be a Q&A session. So welcome Roger S. Glass. He is the great-grandson of the late Clarence Jackson and the late Addie Jackson, both longtime Tarrytown residents. The grandson of the late Virginia Jackson Nelson and the late Henry Nelson, both lifelong Tarrytown residents, and the son of Alban Nelson Glass, who was born and raised in Tarrytown. Roger was born in Tarrytown in 1952 and currently resides in Washington, D.C. Roger began his journey into his family history a little over a decade ago when he happened upon a scrapbook that had been buried in the basement of his grandparents' home in Tarrytown, New York, for more than 60 years. The scrapbook dated back to the early 1900s and was stuffed with newspaper articles, church programs, concert announcements, school report cards, and other documents highlighting the life and achievements of Roger's ancestors, as well as that of other African Americans. Since discovering the scrapbook, Roger has been actively researching his family history and sharing what he's learned through presentations and on his family history blog, Mama Addie's Children, at www.roger-glass.com. So that is his website. If you look up rogerglass.com, you will find his history blog. He is currently working on a book about the scrapbook and his family's history. Roger and his wife Linda live in Northwest Washington, D.C. They have two daughters, Sydney and Kelsey. He is a 1975 graduate of Howard University, and we're so happy to have him here. And thank you for joining us all. Roger, I'm going to turn this over to you, and I'm going to go ahead and highlight you right now.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you to the Greenberg Committee, as well as those of you who have joined on this call. Uh, as has been described, I've been able to um, kind of surprisingly gather some family history, that I was not aware of as little as 15 years ago. And you'll see shortly how I came about it, and what it's meant to me, certainly in terms of being able to do a number of presentations about this family history. Most of it, as has been noted, centered around Tarrytown. A little bit of it centered around Westchester County, and some of it centered around the nation as a whole. So I'm not going to take much time talking about it, but as has been mentioned by Reverend Cobb, if there are any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I will attempt to answer them, at that time, if possible, so that we can have a dialogue. And I also particularly, I want to thank everybody on the call, but I see a lot of friends and family who have joined us, and I want to thank them for taking their time to join on, including my mother. My 96-year-old mother, who's born, as it was mentioned, born and raised in Tarrytown. Went to Washington Irving High School. She's not on camera yet, but hopefully maybe we can get her on camera at some point, because I'd love to have you all see her, and how proud we are, certainly, of her as that original Tarrytowner, in my life anyway. Um, so let me get started here with slideshow. Everybody can see my screen, my is shared properly. Okay, well, good. And I'll move through it pretty rapidly. Again, any questions, because I don't want to overrun the time. We slotted about 45 minutes, and the presentation should be right around that amount of time. So, oh, now it's not advancing. Okay. As I mentioned, it has been mentioned, this discovery of the scrapbook that you see there on the left was a scrapbook that was in my grandparents' home right there on 12 John Street, right around the corner from the music hall. I'm sure those of you who live in Tarrytown know where 12 John Street house is. And that 12 John Street, that house is the first house on your left. It's now blue. It's a different color now since we sold it. But it's the first house on your left when you turn off of Main Street onto John Street. And this is the scrapbook that was fairly well maintained, even though you can tell it's kind of beat up for having been in the basement for at least 60 years, if not longer. And only discovered when we were cleaning out the house around 2009, 2010, when we were planning to sell it. These are some of the materials that you could find or is found in the scrapbook. Just an example. I mean, a lot of it had to do with Tarrytown history, but a whole lot of it had to do with the history of colored, or Negroes, as they called themselves. The big parade there, they had a silent parade in protest of lynching. There's that news, and I'm sure it started by my great grandmother Addie. She kept all these articles, a lot of articles about the blacks who fought in the first World War I and World War II in the scrapbook as well. You see that up top, actually, one of those articles. They did a feature. One of the writers for the Journal News discovered a piece I'd written for the Tarrytown Historical Society, and reached out to me here in Washington, D.C. And for Martin Luther King holiday in 2022, they wanted to do something on civil rights, and they had seen my story, and decided to feature it. And I'm glad, certainly, for my ancestors, that he did. It was mentioned the importance of scrapbooks, and this is a little piece on, scrapbooks that I came across, particularly scrapbooks that were maintained by African American families. But as I mentioned, I think, any family, a lot of this history gets lost. And the scrapbook had a lot of photographs, report cards, church programs, a lot of personal stuff to the family, as well as those articles about what was happening during the early 1900s as well. So you see there the statement made about scrapbooks and the importance of them, and how they refer to them as points of discussion yet, but as most importantly, that last sentence about how, things to assure that certain things would never be forgotten, you know. And again, having discovered the scrapbook is opened up a whole new world to me as far as my awareness of my ancestors. Now, in this scrapbook was one piece of a column that you see on the right that was written by my great aunt Beatrice Jackson back in 1917. And it was that column that really motivated me to a large degree. In fact, I went up to the library in Albany, the State Art Library in Albany, to look for other columns by her that appeared in the Tarrytown Daily News, and found it. But particularly, I wanted to see this entire column because that was the only part of the column that I found in the scrapbook. Now having gone to the library in Albany, I have the entire column. But that, she was very much a very proud Negro, and a very much an advocate for the Negro and colored community, both in Tarrytown, and you'll see some of that later on, and in Westchester and New York and beyond. And this is what she's written actually in response to some claims that some of the Negroes, and I use that word freely because that's what our ancestors called themselves at that time, Negroes and colored. And I don't have a problem if they didn't have a problem, obviously. Um, this was written in response to some concerns that the Negro soldiers fighting in World War I was somehow traitors. And this is how she ended. That's why I said, a race that has never known a traitor. She was pushing back against that notion. One of the things that I found in the scrapbook was this information about, and I'd heard some things about, this is my great great grandmother. She was enslaved on a plantation in Nelson County, Virginia. I actually did a presentation in Nelson County, Virginia, which is near Charlottesville, close to, where the University of Virginia is. She worked as a servant on a Rhodes family farm there in Nelson County. She married Squire Jackson, and I think they had like 4 or 5 kids together. And then she moved to New York State in the late 1800s after her son, my grandfather, had already come to New York. She eventually moved here to join him in Tarrytown. She also had some of her children lived in New York City. She lived to be 114 years old. Now, sometimes you don't, I know she lived to be somewhere between 112 and 114. Sometimes when people who were enslaved, there's not always good records on their birth dates. And this is one of her quotes from that article, and this is her registering to vote at the post office right there in Tarrytown. They lived on, I think, North Washington at the time, and it says in the article that she walked to the post office to vote at 100. I think she was like 111 or 112 at this time when that happened. There was a contest that the CBS television network or radio network did in 1936 to find out who was the oldest living voter um, in the country. Now obviously it was a lot harder back then determining that, because you didn't have the internet and other ways of determining that. But she ended up being nominated or selected as the oldest living voter in the country at the time, and that was 1936. And it says there that right now the leading nominee for the honor is a woman who was said to be 114 years old, Lucy Ann Jackson, a negress of Tarrytown, New York. Um, and I actually got this article from a guy who just, saw some stuff I put on Facebook, and he did some research for me and found this article along with a few other articles. So I'm thankful for him for doing that. This is Lucy Ann's my great grandmother's son, um Papa Jack, Clarence Channing Jackson. He moved to New York, as you see, around 1885. He was born though right in 1863, I think 1864, right around the time of the emancipation there in Basic City, Virginia, now called Waynesboro, Virginia. This is the family. This includes, and you'll see in this photograph, there's Papa Jack standing on the far left. Seated up top are Mama Addie's mother and father. That's Mama Addie with the child in her lap. That's my Aunt Marie, who you hear a little bit about later, and with the child in her lap. And that's Beatrice, who wrote those articles, those columns that we just talked about, seated at her foot there. Papa Jack, one of the first things he did, which is probably not unusual for a man of the South when they moved north, was to help form a church, and that church was Shiloh Baptist Church, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Of course, it's still there and still operating. There, Papa Jack is, as I indicate, in the center there, in the white, the white bib on front, and and he served as the first superintendent of Shiloh Baptist Church when it was organized in 1890. So the family has had a lot of history. It was a church I went to, as a child, for the most part. Papa Jack was referred to as the personal assistant, a chauffeur and personal assistant to the president of the New York Central Railroad, who, for the most part, lived in Westchester, because he served like 8 different presidents of the railroad in the 40-something years that he worked for the railroad. And I like to tell people, that Papa Jack, probably as the chauffeur for the president, and certainly, I'm sure you're aware that at that point, the president of the railroad was one of the most powerful men in America, because that was the major mode of transportation, other than cars, but even, including cars as early as that. So they were always very influential men, the president of the railroad. And Papa Jack, I'm sure, being the wise man that he was, made sure that the president of the railroad, who he was driving pretty often, back and forth, was aware of his thoughts on certain things. This is Papa Jack, again, this is what was said about him shortly after he retired from the railroad after 42 years. There was an article in Tarrytown Daily News about his retirement. It says Mr. Jackson met many dignitaries from all parts of the world during his years as an employee of the New York Central Railroad. And I like to say that Papa Jack, was certainly a dignitary in his own right. After he retired, Papa Jack, decided he was going to grow cotton in his backyard down on, I think they were on, my mother would know, but maybe it's in the article. I think they were on uh, Washington, was it Washington Street or Avenue? I forget there, right near, I guess Shiloh's on the corner, at the time. And a lot of his friends, would tell him, you can't, Jackson, you can't grow cotton up here, in the north. That's a southern crop. He obviously must have learned as a child growing up the first 15 to 20 years down in Virginia, how to grow cotton. And he was able to grow cotton in his backyard right there in Tarrytown. And obviously it was big news. He proved to the people who doubted him, that he could actually grow cotton in his backyard right there in Tarrytown, which is what he did after his retirement. This is Mama Addie. She was born in Petersburg, Virginia. She moved with her family to Tarrytown in the around 1880s. She was widely recognized, you'll see, as a spokesperson for the Black and the Negro and the colored community there in Tarrytown, and a founding member of a group called the Empire State Federation of Women's Clubs, which was affiliated with a national organization that you'll see more about shortly.
Roger, you have a question from your cousin. I don't know if you want to take time to answer it right now. She's asking for
Okay.
a family picture. She wants to know if the little boy on the ground on the right of C.C. Jackson is the little boy on the ground on the right, C.C. Jackson Jr., my grandfather. She's asking about that family picture. I don't know if you want
No,
to.
I think yeah, that's Shelley. I think Shelley that's they had a older. I mean, you're going to see him shortly when I talk about the military. I want his name is Wallace. You see, I think that's the older, the firstborn son. No, that would not have been. No, no, that would not. No, that would not have been him because Aunt Marie was older than him. Yeah, Aunt Marie. In fact, your grandfather was the youngest because my grandmother Virginia was older than him, so that wouldn't be him. So what, at one of the meetings that they had with the mayor and other town leaders, the entire town, they were discussing the needs of the community. And as this article says, he called upon, it says he wished Mrs. Clarence Jackson, that's Mama Addie, a member of the colored race and respected by both races, would give her views. And you see, the concern that she shared was about the lack of recreation for colored boys and girls there in Tarrytown. And she was trying to get the city to address the village of Tarrytown to address that issue. And then some years later, shortly after that, actually a colored community center was formed there in Tarrytown, and Mama Addie would be elected the first president of that uh, Tarrytown. So this article is about it being formed, not yet created. They were in the process of actually raising money to open a community center, a colored community center. That's why it says fledgling. But as it says, a long felt need among colored people for years, and I'll get to a connection later on with that shortly. The need for recreation for particularly colored and Negro children. One of my Mama Addie's roles was as the president. You see, she says Mrs. Clarence Jackson resides. You see there on the flyer on the bottom right. She was an officer, often the president of the Republican clubs, both there in Tarrytown as well as in Westchester County. They have similar flyers of meetings held in Westchester County where Mama Addie was an officer of the countywide Republican organization. And they were referred to as Lincoln Republicans, for obvious reasons, because back then Lincoln, having, been seen as the great emancipator, had a lot of support in the Negro and the colored community. So that support for many, many years, up until really the 1940s, I think almost, that support and this is not just in Tarrytown, this is throughout the country, the support for the Republican Party. A lot of that support was from the Negro and colored community, who for many years supported the Republican Party because of the emancipation. This is an organization, Empire State Federation of Colored Women's Clubs, that is a national organization that where my Mama Addie at one time was the financial secretary for. It was founded by, amongst others, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth. The national organization called National Association of Colored Women's Club was founded by these prominent African American women. I'm sure you recognize those names. Mama Addie would participate in meetings attended by people like Nannie Helen Burroughs and Mary McLeod Bethune and Ida B. Wells. These were the national conventions, usually were often held in New York State, of this prominent women's organization. One of the major roles, a significant role that was played by African American women in the around 1910 and around that era was their involvement in the fight for women's voting rights, which is a kind of an untold story. However, I ran across this book about, well, whenever the 100th anniversary of women winning voting rights, I think it was 2020. This book, written by two professors from two SUNY universities. I think one was Oneonta, is that how you pronounce it? And one other SUNY university. They wrote a book about women winning the right to vote, because one of the what happened when women in New York State, what had happened is several states had voted for the right to women to vote, but it wasn't until women in New York State voted, women and men, I should say, voted to allow women to vote in 1917, that was the watershed moment in the suffrage movement, because now you got probably the largest state in the nation voting to have women when, yeah, women, have the right to vote. So within 2 years or less, there was legislation at the national level for women to have the right to vote. And this was an article about African American women, but also in this book, they actually mentioned Mama Addie in this book. She was obviously in Tarrytowns before the 1910s, but she was a participant. The New York Age was a prominent black newspaper back then, and Mama Addie participated in with one of the annual meetings of the Empire State Federation of Women's Clubs, which is held up in Buffalo in July 1913, and that's where members of that club made sure that they made it clear, they announced through the New York Age that they were supporting the women's suffrage movement. I have other articles of the same black women meeting with some of the white women suffrage movement leaders to try to, make sure that they could, support each other, because, they of course, wanted the support of black men and women who could vote at that time. So, one of the roles that the Empire State Federation of Teachers held was taking care of Harriet Tubman in the last few years of her life. Harriet Tubman at that time lived in Auburn, New York, which I think is up near Rochester and Syracuse, up that way. And she had having a close relationship with the Empire State Federation of Women's Clubs, or them having a close relationship with her. They had received a presentation, the Empire State Federation of Women's Clubs, at one of their meetings, from an individual who had gone to Auburn, New York, to see Harriet Tubman, and he reported the difficulties she was having. She was in her early 90s by this time. He reported on the difficulty she was having. So the Empire State Federation sent one of his board members, a woman named Mary Talbot from Buffalo, New York, to go see her there in Auburn, to see exactly, what her conditions were like. And and they saw that she, while her mental faculties were clear. She was feeble and weak, and she needed the constant care of a nurse, and she needed certain supplies like towels and blankets and sheets. So the executive board of the Empire State Federation voted, at their convention, to make sure that they provided funds to help with who they referred to as Anne Harriet Tubman, to help her be comfortable during her declining years. Um, and then about several months later, this Mary Talbot went back to see Anne Harriet, as they called her, and she reported, that
I give her the
she,
painful.
okay, she reported um, that how she was getting along these days. She was frail, emaciated, and basically, it just a shadow, they said, of what she was years ago. But now she was probably 90, 91 at this time. But she thanked the women who were helping to make her last days on earth comfortable. My Mama Addie, my great grandmother, was financial secretary of the Empire State Federation at that time, and I suspect that either around that time or earlier, she probably has met Harriet Tubman. So Harriet Tubman died. This article is February 27th, 1913. Harriet Tubman died March 10th, 1913, literally about 2 weeks after this article appeared in the New York Age. So within 2 weeks, she had passed away. Um, and this is a statement that she apparently made, in the last days, of her life. She had embraced the cause of women's suffrage, and a lot of people don't know. We know about her Underground Railroad, but a lot of people don't know that a lot of those same African American women, black and colored women, were very adamant supporters, people like Sojourner Truth of, women's suffrage. Um, and she said in a last message to the Empire State Federation, tell the women to stick together. God is fighting for them and all will be well. This is really her last message. And this is in this book, that I have, that you see referenced there at the bottom. One of the things that I found out not too long ago was that the Foster Methodist Church, Foster Memorial Methodist Church, right there in Tarrytown, was a stop on the Underground Railroad. That carried people, former slaves to freedom. Many of them would stop at places like Foster Memorial for food and shelter, and then continue on to Canada, where they were more likely to remain free. But some, as is pointed out here, settled in Tarrytown and nearby towns. And actually, Foster Memorial was founded by an ex-slave, Amanda Foster. Donnie, I know you're still on. That's your church, correct?
Yes, it is. And Foster, we have a crawl space underneath where they used to hide the slaves. The abolitionists used to hide the slaves under the ground floor, and the trap door is still there. I mean, we had everything. We had the foyer and all that area um, uh, refurbished, and it's open for tours as well. So there's a trap door there, and that's where all the slaves hid during that time.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you. Thank you. This is just a last piece on Mama Addie. This is what was in the New York Age, um, shortly after she passed away, which really sums up, who she was. Throughout her life, she was interested in the welfare of the race and was ever ready to aid those who were in trouble. Very much. I mean, I have so much more on Mama Addie that obviously I can't include it all. I'm going to go over. We'll talk a little bit about Mama Addie's children. Wesley, who Shelley, who I think was in that folder we're talking about, and then Beatrice, who I've mentioned, Aunt Marie, uh, uh, Clarence Jr., who is Shelley's grandfather, and my grandmother, Virginia. That's my grandmother, by the way, Virginia, sitting right here in the front. Beatrice, was the first Black girl to graduate from Washington Irving High School. And she, was a powerhouse in so many ways. Um, she had letters published in the Tarrytown Daily newsletter to the editor quite often, and even a couple other New York papers like the New York Herald. I have letters that she wrote, advocating and defending Black folks. And she was a soprano singer and soloist at a very famous Mother Zion AME church in Harlem. She was, I guess, she was the powerhouse. She died at 27. She died from complications in childbirth of her oldest son, my Uncle Bubby, um, as we called him. But yeah, she died at the age of 27. This is a report card, Beatrice's report card from 1904, from Washington Irving High School. I guess it was high school and elementary school at that time because she was in fifth grade. And so this is a report card that's like 120 years old, and that was in the scrapbook. She got good grades. She got good grades for effort and some good grades for writing. So I guess that carried over. Okay. This is a comment, it's a comment up front about Beatrice being a young woman passionately jealous for her race. I've never heard that expression, but I think it probably is very accurate of who she is. This is one of the letters that she wrote, 1917. There is only one thing that keeps the Negro down. I'll let you read it, but it ends talking about lynching. A lot of her letters and a lot of the fight that was going on, that the colored and Negro community was fighting at that time, including through the most prominent organization, NAACP, was to end lynching in the South. And this column that she wrote, this letter to the editors that she wrote, mentioned that, mentioned the lynching and the atrocities being heaped upon colored and Negro people, here in 1917. In 1918, they announced that they were going to be showing Birth of a Nation at the music hall there in Tarrytown. And immediately the colored and Negro community there in Tarrytown protested. They met with the manager of the music hall at the time, said that, as Beatrice was quoted in this article, was saying, that the picture, Birth of a Nation, would start trouble among the children and the after effects, because it was a very demeaning movie, toward Negro and colored people at the time, the way we were portrayed in the movie. So the decision was made by the music hall or whoever was, presenting this show, to cut out 2 scenes in the movie that they considered the most negative toward Negroes and colored. Now, that did not satisfy the Negro and colored community. I would tell you that they still thought the movie should not be shown, but it was shown. Nevertheless, those 2 scenes were cut out, but the movie was shown at the music hall at that time. So this is an article that was in the Tarrytown Daily News about the protest from the colored and Negro community about the showing of Birth of a Nation right there at the music hall, which obviously most of you, all of you know about. I mentioned that Beatrice was a singer with the Mother Zion AME Church, and this is when she was with the junior choir at this time, and it says Miss Beatrice Jackson of Tarrytown, New York, was a soloist and captured all with her sweet voice. And this is the same woman who was the first graduate of first Black woman graduate of Washington Irving, who wrote letters to the editor of the Tarrytown newspaper, and also was performed throughout New York and Westchester County at churches. I have articles and programs of her performing at least 8 or 10 different churches. This is a show, and again, Beatrice organized a show. This is 1920, so she would have been like maybe 16 or 17 at this time. She organized a show at, she may have been 15 or 16 when I think about it. She organized a show at the Sing Sing prison for the prisoner at Sing Sing. And included my grandmother, Miss Virginia Jackson, who sang and danced in the show. So yeah, so she organized the show for the prisoners at Sing Sing, which is, like I said, Beatrice was special. This is Beatrice again. During the 1917 election, when I talked about earlier, when they passed, when they voted to give women in New York State the right to vote, Beatrice was a poll watcher, as we would call them today. And this is her poll watch registration card. She was actually at a church in Harlem on 138th Street an elementary school. She was her poll watching site. You can see that up top. I think it says PS 84, 138th Street in Harlem. So that's where she was assigned on that election day, November 1917, 6 days, November 6, 1917, which was again when a historic vote to give women the right to vote that led to the national legislation took place in New York State. This is what was said about Beatrice after she passed away. The Negro race had no better defender than she. She passed away, as I said, at 27. She was a race woman from the bottom of our heart. And I just think so often about what she would have accomplished. We saw what she did in the 27 years that she lived. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of cousins who were in both wars. Actually, my uncle Wesley Jackson was in World War I. That was Beatrice's and my grandmother's brother. and then I'll, Mama Addie, I'll share a little bit more. I won't stop on this slide. I'll just go through that. By the way, that's my mother here, standing with my Uncle Jimmy, my 96-year-old mom, back in during World War II, so that's my mom there. This is my uncle. I actually got this off Ancestry.com. I put in his name in World War I, and this is my uncle Wesley, my great uncle Wesley's registered enlistment in 1937. And you see this, I was told by a woman who actually does um, some Black family history for OSNI named Joyce Chirac, who that when she came to my presentation at the library there, Warner Library, she said with the Black soldiers, they would cut off the corner of the form there. See the enlistment form on the lower left, how it was cut off? And that's how they knew that's how they identified them as Black without putting it in writing. And she's the one who told me that, and I said, sure enough, it's cut off down there.
Hmm.
One of the things that would happen, and I see what time, I want to get through this pretty quickly. The 15th National Guard of New York were trained in Peekskill, New York, before they went over to fight in France in World War I. They would come down to Tarrytown to the peekaboos when they weren't being trained. Peekaboos, you see the photos there, were down near the railroad tracks, and peekaboos were what we call strip clubs today. And some of the residents of Tarrytown were complaining that they would be rowdy and after they left the peekaboos. And this is a letter, again, written by Beatrice for that appeared in the Tarrytown Daily News, where she says, that these are without exception the cleanest lots of boys and men you found anywhere. She says, I stand to defend to the last stand every man connected with the 15th Infantry. 15th Infantry went on to become known as the Harlem Hellfighters, a very well-known and prominent group of military men who fought in France and came back with all sorts of recognition and medals for their service over in France. During the World War I, my grandmother and my great grandmother, Mama Addie, and my grandmother Virginia, and my aunt Marie would sew hats. The Red Cross would have them sewing knitting hats and gloves and scarves for the men overseas. Well, my great grandmother, Mama Addie, found out that excuse me, that some of the Black troops over there weren't receiving some of the knitted things they were knitting for the Red Cross. So she actually started a Red Cross in her home there in Tarrytown, and actually became the Tarrytown Red Cross over time. So in 1917, I think, or thereabout, she started the Red Cross chapter in the home in Tarrytown so that she can make sure that the stuff they were knitting for the men fighting in the war, particularly the colored and Negro soldiers, received the knitted items that they were knitting. This is Uncle Bubby, who I mentioned earlier, Channing Conway. He actually was a Tuskegee Airman, prestigious Tuskegee Airman during the World War II. And this is him on the cover to the far left. That's him pictured far left on the cover of The Crisis, which was the magazine of the NAACP at the time. And this is Uncle Chan. This is Shelley's grandfather, who she just asked about. I'm going to go through him, quickly as well because of time. But I do want to say something. Obviously, something about him. He was a remarkable athlete. He set all sorts of records there at Washington Irving High School. He came within like the 2 inches of setting the world's high school record for the high jump. He ran track. He would win all sorts of medals during his track meets that would involve athletes of Washington Irving High School. Then he was a big football star. You know, it says here there was common occurrence for young Jackson to make exceptional long runs and win games within seconds of the final period. His terrific burst of speed and his ability to twist and turn and weave and dodge were executed quicker than the bat of an eyelid. He went on to college, as a track runner. So I think it's Springfield College. This is Uncle Chan here, handing off. I guess they're practicing a relay with one of his teammates there, Washington Irving. And this is what was said of him after he graduated in 1922 from Washington Irving. He says, "We are frank to admit that it will be some years before another Jackson is discovered. He is a wonder athlete." But, the thing about Uncle Chan, though, that I'm going to talk about now that really, Uncle Chan went on to become the first Black supervisor in the recreation department in Baltimore. And he, and I connect the dots here because just as his mother, Mama Addie, fought for opportunities, for recreational opportunities for Black youth, Uncle Chan did the same in Baltimore. You see his quote, "I used every trick in the trade to gain facilities and opportunities for Black youth." That's him there, obviously in the white suit with the mayor. That's the mayor of Baltimore. I think in the middle there, that's Uncle Chan there in the white suit, with opening one of the recreation centers that he was really responsible, for helping to open there in Baltimore. They actually have a recreation center in Baltimore named after Uncle Chan. And this is a son of Tarrytown, and there's a recreation center there in North Baltimore, C.C. Jackson Recreation Center. This is a picture when we visited there. That's my grandmother in the blue Virginia on the far left. That's my mother there in the red top. That's Uncle Chan's son, Doug, and that's Aunt Lucille, Uncle Chan's wife, there in the light colored suit. And this is when shortly after they opened the recreation center in the name of Uncle Chan. Again, the same wonder kid athlete at Washington Irving went on to do great things in another city. My grandmother, Virginia Nelson, was recognized for her service of 50 years for the Red Cross there in Tarrytown. She says she earned a reputation at chapter headquarters for being able to fill requests for sweaters, Afghans, gift bags, because she did all this knitting and sewing. She was a seamstress most of her life, and she knitted. I have right here some blankets and Afghans and have sweaters that my grandmother knitted, and my mother, my 96-year-old mother, still knits things for us. She knits things for my grandchildren now, but my 96-year-old mother is still a knitter, a family tradition. This is right outside the neighborhood house, right there in Tarrytown. And I guess it's the corner with Washington and Wilgie. This is my grandmother's, the first tree right out the side the entrance was named in honor of my grandmother, Virginia Nelson, for all of her service to the neighborhood house right there in Tarrytown. This is an article about my Aunt Marie, who I spoke a little about earlier. She was in the original picture. She started a program called Early Alert that actually got picked up by other Red Cross chapters there in Tarrytown, and I think even nationwide. She was interviewed by the National Red Cross. And it was an effort between the post office and the Red Cross is that if an older person's mail remained untouched for 3 days, the Postal Service, the letter carrier, would contact the Red Cross, who would investigate to make sure that that person was safe. This became a county-wide program, and even I think is not a national program to protect the elderly people, to somebody to look in on them if it was discovered by the post office that they hadn't picked up their mail. This is the grave site for Mama Addie, Lucy Ann, to my great grandmother who lived to be 113, 114. Wesley, the oldest child of Mama Addie, who enlisted in World War One, and Papa Jack, my great grandfather. So this is the closing. I certainly appreciate your time. I've done this at least varies in person or online, on Zoom 8 to 10 times, and each time you know, and I'm sure my family who are on the call would say the same, or prouder and prouder of what my ancestors did, both there in Tarrytown and elsewhere. So that's my presentation. I don't know if they, I'll stop to share. So if there are any questions, and I want to see if we can ask the questions live. I want to see if Doreen is my sister. Doreen, come off mute for a sec. She's just, lives out in Phoenix and Surprise, Arizona, with my mom. Or maybe I wanted to see if Doreen could get my mom on camera. I wanted to. She's been on some of the other Zoom presentations that I've done, and I'd love for her to join us. Because you see, she's one of those Zooms, with Doreen's name on it, but she can't know if I can get her to come on, so we
Well,
can.
while we're waiting for Mom, let me just thank you so much for this presentation. People are thanking you in the chat. You're really brilliant. I know that you've done it before, but I've never seen it before. There are people on it we're seeing this for the first time, and this is so much of Tarrytown history that so many people don't know about. I mean, I was born and raised in Tarrytown. This history is also archived on the Tarrytown Historical Society website, but please
Yeah, a
visit
lot of it is.
Roger's website as well for this information. Does anyone have questions for Roger? This is our Q&A time. We have some time left here for
Roger,
their
Yes. Hey,
Doreen.
okay. It's
I'm
Doreen.
trying to get mommy on. It's my camera's is not working on this computer. But I
Okay.
wanted to tell you, this is the first time I heard about Aunt Marie and that Red Cross
Me
thing.
too.
And mommy said so
Okay.
too. Yeah, that
Okay.
was really
Well,
good.
Well, I still got this scrapbook, and I go through it, at least, once a month. And each time I go through it, I find more stuff that I hadn't seen before. And I'm sure that, there will be more to come along. And there's a lot in the scrapbook, obviously, I'm not able to include. And because Anne Marie started another program similar to that for the Red Cross, and I'm trying to remember what it did, but it did something very much akin to that, and maybe mentioned, in fact, in that article that I posted. But I just chose to focus on that one called that First Alert Program. So yeah, no, Aunt Marie, Aunt Marie, again, the family history in the Red Cross goes back to World War One. So it was not unusual that Aunt Marie and our grandmother Doreen, Virginia, were lifelong activists with the Red Cross. Lifelong volunteers.
And Raj, I have that plaque that in that picture of someone handing grandma something.
Okay.
And it's a plaque for 50 years of being in the Red Cross. It's a silver platter that I
Oh,
have.
okay.
And
Okay.
it says,
Okay.
yeah, in 1968. So it's from
Okay. The same
1918.
one.
Yeah.
So Roger, let me ask you, what has it meant for you to research this information and share it with the public? What's that like? Because that's a singular experience. Not everybody gets to do that.
Yeah, what has surprised me is how
Oh, that's Chuck Ray.
how frequently.
Chucky Ray.
Hey, Doreen.
Yeah.
Go ahead and mute. We can hear you. Yeah, Chucky there. Okay, I want to introduce you. Wait, Doreen mentioned Chucky. You know, I'm surprised, first of all, how often I have been asked, and I'm thankful. I did a presentation for a group called the Westchester Rockland Association Association of Women Professors, I think. And what a friend of ours from Nanuet, Maureen Brown, who worked at Rockland County Community College, asked me to do it was a Black History presentation about 2 years ago for them. But I keep getting asked, and I certainly appreciate it. But what it means for me is, and this, it's corny and sentimental, but it means I'm doing what my ancestors asked me to do. They left that scrapbook for a reason. I found that scrapbook for a reason. They said, hey, what are you going to do? So I'm almost, in this book I'm writing, and I've got a lot of it done, I mean, and then my thinking is, if I don't care if I sell one book, I'm going to do this book because this is what they want me to leave behind. I'm a writer. That's what I've done for my career for the last, 50 years. I've worked as a journalist and writer. So they've given me what I consider my last and probably our most important assignment to do this book. So I appreciate that question.
Hey, Raj, we found a lot more information downstairs when we were cleaning out the basement
Yeah.
years
Yeah, I
ago.
remember Johnny helped. Yeah.
No, but I'm saying we run across a lot of newspaper articles and everything down there.
Yeah, we did. We did. And I have a lot of that. In fact, my
Yeah.
wife, she couldn't be on the call, but she wants me to move me out, which I got so many of the bins that I bought down from Tarrytown, and I also bought a lot. They had a lot of antique furniture,
Yeah.
and I knew it was valuable, so I bought it with me. And then as I go on through these pictures, I see some of this furniture in pictures from like the 1920s and 1930s.
Mm.
So some of this furniture is 100 years old. You know what I'm saying? So I got a mirror sits in my dining room, and I got a picture with Uncle Bubby on the couch around 1940. And that mirror is and I didn't know I don't know how I got the mirror, because I got it before we cleaned out the house. I think my grandmother must have given it to me. That mirror is in the photograph in Tarrytown in the living room on John Street. This is around 1935, 1940. And I got that mirror now, 80 years later, hanging in my living room. So those things, are precious to me for sure.
I remember going over Uncle Bubby's house in
Yeah,
Elmsford
yeah.
to watch the All-Pro game. Yeah.
Also, there are a couple of people I want to mention on the call. There's my sister Darlene. She's that phone number, that 301 number. As I mentioned, my cousin Shelly, who's Uncle Chan. I mean, she's got to be, along with her father, she's proud of, but her Uncle Chan, it's phenomenal. And he was the nicest guy.
Yeah.
He was the nicest guy. And it wasn't until after he had passed that started seeing pictures of him with people like Jesse Owens. He knew he was like the first. Uncle Chan was the first coach. He was one of the coaches of the first women's Olympic team. But the first time they had Olympic team of women athletes, it must have been in the 40s or something. Uncle Chan was one of the coaches, and he was a personal friend of Jesse Owens. That Jesse Owens would visit his home in Baltimore when he came to town.
Yeah.
And and see, they never talked about this. The family never talked about this. So,
They did to
because they
me.
weren't. Good for you.
I have some pictures for you. I have a
Okay,
picture.
I'm glad you heard,
picture for
Shelley.
that.
I'm glad you heard, because I knew about his fame in track and field, but I never thought about the people he would have come in contact with.
Oh,
But
yeah.
also on this call is Chucky Rabin. Chucky grew up with me on Chuck. Raise your hand. I know your name is there on John Street. Chucky, his brother Alan, Wayne Wright, the Matthews, Docky Matthews, Guy Matthews. We all grew up together on John Street and spent many a summer day playing baseball up at Washington Irving High School. We'd get up in the morning and go up to Washington Irving. I'm just so glad Chucky could join us. We stay in contact mostly via, email and text. Just a quick story. We found out both of our daughters went to the University of North Carolina, my youngest daughter and Chuck's daughter. And and several years after they graduated, I saw that Chuck's daughter was a friend on Facebook of my daughter, Kelsey. And it turns out they met each other at University of North Carolina. This was like my daughter graduated from there in 2010. So they never knew that, that their fathers knew each other, So anyway, any more questions?
Well, Roger, you're talking about the legacy of your family and all, how many of your family members actually, contributed to this legacy. And I'm wondering, is there a part of your family's legacy that you're most proud of, or is it just kind of the big picture for you? Or is there something that stands out for you that you feel like right here?
Well, Reverend Cobb, you asked tough questions. You asked the emotional question, but the thing that are probably the person, and obviously Mama Addie was, what she did, Papa Jack, Uncle Chan, but Beatrice lived to be 27. Here was a woman before the age of 27 was writing the letters, well-written letters to Tarrytown Daily News as a teenager. Here was a woman who was a featured soloist at not Mount Zion, Zion Back AME Church in Harlem. Here was, and she performed. I got programs of here for performing throughout New York City and Westchester. Here was a woman who was organizing concerts at Sing Sing Prison. I just think about what would she have? She would have been a figure in the Harlem Renaissance. She would have been a prominent figure in the Harlem Renaissance. I have no doubt about that, because that was her era.
Yeah.
Okay, that was her era, and Zion Church, Langston Hughes, and people like that. That was their church.
Yes.
So there's a good chance they probably saw her sing as a young girl. Okay, so she, she is the one, I guess, who I feel in what I write, and what I've written just far. I say that she's my muse, MUSE. I feel like if there's anybody who I'm channeling, whose legacy I'm picking up, particularly as a writer, it's her legacy, that was cut short. That was cut short.
Indeed. She's so
Yeah.
very powerful.
She's the one she's the one I hear from most often. Mama Addie I hear from most often.
Roger.
Mama Addie is who started 1 second, Don, who started the scrapbook is the one who's telling me, keep doing this work. In fact, do more of it. So anyway, Johnny.
Yeah, no, I have a question for you. Did you get a chance to ask Aunt Virginia and Uncle Bubby and all of them any questions before they passed on
No.
about the
See, the problem, my Aunt Jerry, as you
Yeah.
know, Donnie really looked out for my Aunt Jerry, in her last years of life there on John Street. She was the last family member. Virginia Conway was the last family member to live in on 12 John Street. She was Beatrice's only daughter. And because after Aunt Jerry, Virginia passed away, and she was down at the Tarrytown nursing home, I guess it is, right down there, down the block from you,
Yeah,
Donnie. That's the nursing
yeah,
home.
yeah.
That's where she was, which was the hospital I was born in, by the way. It was a hospital when I was born. I didn't find that scrapbook until after she had passed away.
Yeah.
And there's so much, particularly photographs, in that scrapbook that I know. My mother's helped me some, but Aunt Jerry, who knew everybody, as we know it, if I had had that scrapbook and that information, and I can't figure for the life of me why, because I grew up, in and around that house on John Street. Why no one ever pulled that scrapbook out of the basement unless it was forgotten? The last entries in that scrapbook were around 1938, 1940, around the time Mama Addie died. The first entries go back to like 1907, 1908. So after Mama Addie died, that scrapbook was put in that basement in a box, hidden under a lot of junk, because we would be in the basement sometime. It wasn't a finished basement, but I had a grandfather had a railroad train track for me down there. And because I didn't discover that scrapbook, I didn't have answer a lot of questions. Now, that is painful in many respects, but it also has forced me to do more of this research on my own. But I really wish I had been able to talk to Melissa, my Aunt Jerry, before she passed away, and showed her these pictures. Who is this? Who is that? Where is this? Where is that? It's interesting. I got a lot of pictures. I think my mom's on the phone listening, but can't be on the call. I put together a photo spread for my mom with some pictures I found, and I had about 15 pictures of her with some of the Black men from Tarrytown who had gone off to war in their uniforms. With just her with this I showed the one with Uncle Jimmy, but all these other men, and I kid her about it, all these other soldiers in uniforms who I'm sure were from Tarrytown or Ossining, because we got family in Ossining too, in uniform, because she had pictures with that I found, in this scrapbook, 'cause of course of course I recognized her. So
Roger, you mentioned earlier Joyce Chirac Cole, and
right,
I was on a broadcast with her last year sometime, and she was talking about how many folks have valuable like treasures in their basement that they don't know
right.
about. And she encourages people just go in your
Look,
basement
right,
and
right.
see what's down there, because you don't want to lose that history, because it's so important for us to archive this. I know my mother's on the call. Mom's 95. She was one of
Oh, okay. Mary
the
Lane. I met,
second,
yeah.
yes, Dr. Mary
Okay,
Lane. She was
okay.
the second
Wow.
Black physician in Westchester and the first woman Black physician in Westchester. And so
Okay.
she was the doctor for the
Right.
Black community in
Yeah.
Tarrytown and
What,
Ossining,
right.
many of
Well,
the
she
villages.
would know. Yeah, I'm glad you brought out your mom, because I think Lynn mentioned her as well in the phone call we had. Hello, Mom, Mary Lane. Good to have you. So we went to Dr. Whiteman, who you probably knew, who's right up the corner across the street from the high school,
Yes,
Washington Irving, a Black doctor.
Yes.
Now, did you go to Washington Irving?
she
No,
didn't live.
no, no.
She no. She.
Okay. Okay.
Go
I was
ahead, Mom.
curious
You can
because
tell your own story. I'll shut up. Go ahead.
My son uh, and daughter. Yes.
okay. Okay.
Lane, you went to
Yeah,
Washington.
we grew up in Tarrytown. As we went to this school, but mom moved here, came here for a residency at Grasslands Hospital, which is now Westchester Medical Center.
Sure. hmm
So that's how
Remember
she
Grass
got
said. Okay.
here.
So you mentioned Joyce Chirac. Actually, she came to the presentation at the library that I did, and I met her a couple other times. She's close friends with my cousin Donna Chambers.
Yes.
She and Joyce so I've been around Joyce a few times, and I mentioned that Joyce was the one who told me about how they cut the corner off of the enlisted black men, during World War I, to be able to identify them as being black without saying it, you
Uh,
know, without saying it. Very interesting. Yeah,
mm,
Joyce does great things there in Ossining.
Yes, she
She
does.
has an annual February. I'm sure she's doing it this Black History Month. She does a regular Black History Month program and
yes.
presentation
At
usually.
Bethany Arts Center, absolutely.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
still
I haven't had a
running.
chance to
It's
make it.
still running,
Okay,
I think, through March 2nd. I think through this week.
okay. Yeah,
It's still running.
Joyce is
Yeah.
and someone asked in the chat about Joyce Chirac, being related to Sonny Chirac, and she is. And
She is.
I was familiar with Sonny Chirac before I met, 'cause I'm a big jazz man, before I met Joyce Chirac. So when Donna told me, "Oh yeah, Sonny Chirac is Sonny her father?" I mean, I don't know how she's related, but it's the same family. But
I
yeah,
think uncle.
Uncle.
I think.
Okay, Sonny Chirac, for those who don't know, was a great jazz. He's a guitarist, and he had a very unique style. And he's got recordings out there. Play with a lot of the great jazz musicians.
The Chiracs came to Foster. They belonged to Foster for a long time. Foster
Okay,
Memorial for
okay,
a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
okay.
hmm
And let me.
Chuck, Chuck, I just want Chuck. You want to say anything? I want to.
Well, I'm
He's
hesitant to
carried
say
out.
something because I might say the wrong thing. But my
You can just-
mother, I knew Bubby, and I knew very well your grandmother, Virginia, in Geary. And my brother and I used to go over there and watch the Yankees. But I want to get to something more substantive. My mother lives down the hall. That's why I ran away for a few moments. She's 99. She grew up on John Street too. And my point is, when we were growing up, we didn't look at people as black or white. We looked at them as human beings. And I know, and when people, that wasn't, that's the way it's supposed to be. And sometimes you hear people say, oh, our country's not a racist society. It is a racist society. From the history. So that, but John Street wasn't from our perspective. Although when you got outside of John Street, I'll give you a quick story my mother told me last night. My mother wanted to invite Chipper to the
Chipper
Cherry
Matthews.
Crest pool. It's a private pool to go swimming. And someone's not on, and someone said to my mother, well, Chipper may feel embarrassed about going there because no one ever invited a, he was a little older than me at the time. This is 1961. I was like 8 years old, 10 years old, whatever. So he may feel embarrassed. So I told my mother last night, well, Chipper shouldn't be the one should be embarrassed. It should be the members of the club should be embarrassed. So, but eventually I recall inviting my close friend Doc to the pool, and he went, but that was years later. But I'm just a little history there. That's all I'm going to tell you.
Yeah, Tarrytown had its race issues at one time, and as an article I find, and I really got to find it, where there was some racial strife. Not just the movie Birth of a Nation movie that I referenced in the slideshow. I found an article where there was actually some violence and I think it was like 1915, 1920, around that
Yeah.
time. There was actually some physical conflicts between Tarrytown's Black community, which probably wasn't that small, wasn't that large, but and the larger white community. And and Beatrice, again, Beatrice was very quick. She was talking about Tarrytown when she was talking about the issues, that the colored and Negroes were having. She wasn't talking about Westchester or New York State or the United States of America in most of those columns. She was talking about concerns that she had with some of the attitudes of some of the white residents of Tarrytown. So, like you said, we it's always been a racist society, and not everybody. But to your point, Chuck,
Hmm.
right when we hung out, we were just friends, as kids, and that's how most kids are. It's later on that we somehow get tainted, usually by the adults. But anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, leave
I know you don't want to
the.
get into the politics of it on
Yeah,
the
that's
stage,
right.
so
I'll
I'm
leave
not
it
saying
at
anything else.
that.
Lynn,
Anybody?
oh,
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Roger. No, I was just going
No,
to
I know.
invite.
I was asking any questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to ask Lynn if she had any questions and then to invite some last comments from you, Roger.
No, I don't have any questions. I just want to express my admiration for how you structured the presentation and how you zoomed in on just a few sentences in some of these articles that were really portrayed the feeling and the story of the entire article. It was so well done that
Thank you.
it was wonderful, and so showed a lot of artistry, I think.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that we should close up now because we've been going for quite a while. So
Okay.
anybody, I invite you to make, I really appreciate you sharing. I think everybody was delighted. We're all going to go and do scrapbooking now. And it's just wonderful to hear the great history of Tarrytown. I mean, I'm actually curious. Well, I don't want to prolong it, but I wonder why Tarrytown was so not racist. Like, what is it about Tarrytown, people that makes it more diverse? That's always.
Well, I'm not so sure it is. Back then in particular, I can't speak for Tarrytown in 2025 because I haven't been there in the longest. What I always asked, and I thought you were going there. I don't know why Papa Jack and Mama Addie ended up in Tarrytown, as opposed to like New York City. Obviously, Tarrytown had train tracks, the train. Papa Jack had at least an older sister named Mary who lived in New York City for many years. Mama Addie's family came from Petersburg, Virginia, to Tarrytown, directly to Tarrytown. But I'm not sure, why Tarrytown. I mean, I think it ended up being a great place, and it continued to be a great place. I mean, growing up, Tarrytown, was not a place to be. I go up there now. I mean, I shouldn't say not a place to be. It's not the place to go. I go there now. I couldn't afford to live there. Okay, the difference is, that Tarrytown, and Tarrytown was always convenient to New York City. Both my grandfather, Henry Nelson, worked as a he got it. I'm sure my great grandfather, his father-in-law, Papa Jack, who worked obviously for New York Central Railroad, got my grandfather worked as a maintenance person for New York Central Railroad. That was his career, and he worked with. I got pictures of him, and there's a crew of about 5 or 6 people he worked with. He was the only black one, but I'm sure Papa Jack, being in the position he had with the ear of the president of New York Central Railroad, got his son-in-law that job, got him a good union job, that yeah, so he get up early on the snowy days, 2, 3 in the morning to go. I thought he was shoveling off the tracks from Tarrytown down to Grand Central Station. That's what I thought about. I really thought that about when I was a kid. I said, "Oh, Grandpa's working. He must be shoveling the tracks, the 20 miles of tracks from Tarrytown to Grand Central." I later would learn. Oh, you laugh. I later would learn they were clearing the switches, the train switches. That's what their jobs were. But they had to get up 2, 3 in the morning when it snowed to get out there to do that. But he was my hero, so that's my job. That's what I believe, and I'm sticking with it. I know that Lynn. I think you asked in the chat. I just saw where Chuck lives. Chuck, where do you live now? Because she asked if you were
I live in
Tarrytown.
Millburn, New Jersey. It's like 9
Okay.
miles west of Newark Airport.
I was
Okay, I know
hoping
you-
to wrangle some people to be more active on the Human Rights Committee. So anybody who lives within the confines of the town of Greenberg, please reach out to me or Lane and let us know how we can interest you in our work. So we have like just a few more minutes. You want to give us your closing thoughts, Roger?
I mean, I don't have. I mean, I've said most of what I like to say during these presentations. I really try not to make it about me, even though in this book that I'm doing, I've been, and it's not in my bio because I didn't include it, but before I found this family history, I was the PTA president of my daughter's elementary school and my daughter's high school. Mama Addie was on the PTA at Washington Irving. I got a little card, where they named the PTA officers on it in the scrapbook. I've been a founding member of a local group called the Washington D.C. chapter of Concerned Black Men, which mentors and work with youth here in the District of Columbia. I've served 2 terms as the president of the Washington Association of Black Journalists back in the mid '80s, during which time we started a scholarship program for high school students who wanted to go on to study journalism at the university level. I say all that to say that after getting this history, I realized that those things I did wasn't my doing. they were my destiny, because that's what my ancestor did. Okay, so and I didn't, I did all these things, in the 1980s and 1990s, for the most part, even though I'm still with Concerned Black Men. But it wasn't until 2008, 2009 that I got this scrapbook, and then I said, okay, there's some, there's something, some. So that's why I said when I do this book, there's a little bit of memoir to it, but I want it's really going to be, about the ancestors as as it has been, as I've been putting it together. So I'm just humbled, quite frankly.
Let us know when the book comes out.
God will. I appreciate that. I'm
Yeah.
humbled by the charge, that they've given me, and it's it's the greatest of wealth. it's the
Thank
greatest
you
of
so
wealth,
much.
yeah.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. I appreciate all you've done.
Mhm.
We all get a copy,
Okay.
right, Rod?
Okay,
Mm.
yes, indeed. I appreciate all of you who joined in, and hopefully I get to meet some of you who I don't know. I do get to Tarrytown from time to time, so.
Good.
But and thank you particularly, Miss Lane, Mother Lane. I wish my mother was
Dr.
on. I wish my
Lane.
mother was on because you all kind of look alike.
Oh.
I mean, I wish he could get on, and I'm sure that Darlene would say just similarities. And true. And you're 95. Is that what your mother is, Lane? Not? Did you say 95?
Yes. Yes.
Uh-huh. And because my mom, is 96, turned 97, will turn 97 in June, and we were just out there with her in mid-January. We went out to visit her. We try to get out there at least once or twice a year. So wanted to take the grandchildren. My daughter wanted to take the grandchildren out. But thank you all
Well,
again. Thank you all.
Thank
Yeah, I
you.
want to encourage people who are here and also who are watching this recording to really visit Roger Glass's website and also the website of the Tarrytown Historical Society that has all of his writings about this Tarrytown history. It's absolutely fascinating, and we're just so pleased that you took time to share with us this evening.
Just let me add one thing you mentioned. So I did an article. The Historical Society asked me to do an article for just Black History Month. Sarah did. Harry Burleigh as a young man performed at the music hall when he was like in his mid-20s, Tarrytown Music Hall. When he first within a year or two of moving to New York from somewhere in Pennsylvania. I can't think. I'll think of it in a minute. But anyway, one of his first performances was a benefit for Tarrytown Hospital Association at the Tarrytown Music Hall. Before Tarrytown had a hospital, they were trying to raise money for it. And he went on to become maybe the most distinguished composer and singer of Negro spirituals. His famous one is Deep River of all time. Performed throughout the world and certainly New York City. He came back. I came back to Tarrytown in like the 1930s and performed at Asbury Episcopal Church. Is that what the Episcopal Church is? There in Tarrytown, like
Yeah.
30, maybe almost 30 years. Yeah, over 30 years, because he performed initially in 1894 in Tarrytown at the music hall. So there's an article about him and his connection to Tarrytown, and I've known about Harry Boulay from some of the clippings that were in the scrapbook. That's how I knew he had a Tarrytown connection from the scrapbook. And I told Sarah, let me do something on Harry Boulay. And then I connected it to Asbury, which she had some information about that she provided me. So Harry Boulay, Burlea, or you can go to the Tarrytown Historical Society website. And because he was a powerhouse, there's a documentary out actually about Harry Boulay, the famous spiritual singer of Negro spirituals. Just one final thing, and I'm going. Talk to your elders. Talk to them because they got history. Okay. Don't let them leave us without getting that history. Like I said, I missed out on some of that. So talk to your elders who are still with us.
Thank
That's
you
my
so
last
much.
word, right?
All right, Lane, you want to wish everyone good night,
Yes,
wherever Lane
I
is?
wish everyone good night. I just put the link to the Historical Society in the chat. And anybody who wants to save this chat can do so. There's by hovering over the three dots at the bottom of the chat on your screen. We will be in touch. Roger, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. It's a pleasure to meet all of your family members. Congratulations on this wonderful legacy. And please stay tuned for information about the Greenberg Human Rights Advisory Committee. We absolutely could use more hands and more hearts in our effort to fight for human rights in Greenberg and the river towns. All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.